The attack in Pahalgam has, well, it's obviously caused a lot of concern. And everyone's asking, what's next? So in this deep dive, we want to try and unpack the complexities here, look at India's possible responses.
It's definitely a tense moment. Prime Minister Modi's statement, promising retribution, giving the military complete operational freedom, that really caught people's attention.
Yeah, complete operational
Yeah.
freedom. That phrase really stands out, doesn't it? It feels like it could mean, well, almost anything. Understanding that range seems pretty key.
Absolutely. And the international reaction was swift. The U.S., for example, reached out pretty quickly to both India and Pakistan, urging them to dial things back.
We heard from the State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio is apparently making calls, too. It just shows how high the stakes are internationally.
It really does. And it wasn't just the U.S. We saw similar messages, calls for restraint coming from the U.K., Saudi Arabia, the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. Even Iran offered to mediate.
You know, it's sad, but this isn't the first time, is it? We've been here before attacks, then international calls for calm. I mean, Pulwama in 2019, Uri in 2016, both led to Indian retaliation.
That history is, well, it's crucial context, isn't it? It sets a kind of precedent, influences what people expect both inside India and internationally.
Okay. So given Pahalgam, the PM's strong words, the global calls for calm, and that history of responding, what are the paths India might actually take? And what are the big things they'll be weighing up? That's what we really need to dig into today.
Right. Let's maybe start with the immediate stuff. The first thing, always, after an attack like this is security, right? So we've almost certainly seen a bigger security presence on the ground in the Kashmir Valley already.
Yeah, that seems like step one.
Yeah.
Try to stop any copycat attacks, make people feel a bit safer.
Exactly. And there are reports filtering through about intensified operations against militants. Sometimes that includes things like demolishing houses linked to terrorists. But, and this is critical, they have to be really careful about not harming innocent civilians. That can backfire badly.
It's a real balancing act, isn't it? Show you're taking action, but don't end up making the situation worse by alienating locals. Okay, so beyond locking things down immediately, what about the diplomatic front? What can India do there?
Diplomacy is complicated here, mainly because the India-Pakistan relationship is already so poor. It really limits the non-military options, at least in the short term.
Right. You don't really expect high-level talks to suddenly materialize. So what diplomatic tools are left?
Well, a key strategy could be trying to rally more international support, really put pressure on Pakistan's military establishment. That means talking to the big global players, international organizations.
We mentioned the U.S. outreach, so that's happening. But what would the specific goals be? What does India want diplomatically?
There are a few possibilities. Trying to get sanctions on specific military figures, maybe like General Munir, that's tough to achieve, but it could be on the list. A more likely path is publicly highlighting alleged links between Pakistan's ISI and terrorist groups in global forums.
The idea being to try and isolate Pakistan. Sort of like the backlash they faced after bin Laden was found there.
That's the kind of thinking, yeah. Create international disapproval, make it harder for Pakistan to operate. And that could lead to some concrete diplomatic asks.
Like what?
Well, pushing countries to stop military aid to Pakistan. Think about the U.S. F-16 upgrades, or maybe restricting spare parts, clamping down on non-humanitarian aid, trying to freeze funding from international bodies for projects in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. And that's another angle.
What about things directly related to counterterrorism?
Oh, absolutely. Pushing for wanted terrorists believed to be in Pakistan to be extradited, getting new names added to UN Security Council sanctions lists, and maybe renewed pressure through the FATF, the financial watchdog, on terror financing.
Okay, so a real multi-pronged diplomatic push,
Sure.
trying to isolate, raise the costs. But as we know from the past, diplomacy alone might not feel like enough. Which brings us to, well, military responses. What sort of kinetic options could be on the table?
The military options, they exist on a spectrum, from, very targeted actions to something bigger. Surgical strikes across the line of control, hitting militant launch pads in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. That's definitely still seen as a viable option. We've seen it before.
Right, those are meant to be precise, limited.
Yeah.
What about bigger military moves?
India could think about larger airstrikes, maybe going beyond what happened at Balochistan in 2019, hitting training camps or infrastructure deeper inside Pakistan. Missile strikes on known militant bases are also technically possible.
Those would be pretty significant escalations, though. What about other parts of the military? The Navy, perhaps.
The Navy could play a role, yes.
Well,
Mobilizing ships in the northern Arabian Sea. That could put pressure on Pakistan's shipping, hit their economy, which is already fragile, by raising insurance costs, disrupting trade.
a show of force with potential economic bite.
Okay, now, besides these sort of overt military actions, what about the less visible stuff?
Covert operations are, well, highly likely, I'd say, targeting key militant leaders, their networks, inside Pakistan. That means intelligence ops, perhaps targeted actions, and then there's cyber warfare, disrupting communications, messing with terrorist infrastructure online. That's another tool in the box.
Right, those covert and cyber options let you hit back without maybe triggering a full-blown conventional war. But we also have to think about Pakistan. How are they likely to react if India does something?
A big all-out conventional war. That seems pretty improbable. Pakistan likely doesn't have the resources, militarily or economically, for that right now.
That fits with most thinking. They probably want to avoid a fight they can't win, so what might they do?
Maybe some limited conventional conflict, perhaps hoping to draw in international mediators, get the world focused back on Kashmir. And internally, you can bet the Pakistani military would use any crisis to kind of boost its own image, rally support at home. Play the defender of the nation card. Always a concern in this region is the nuclear angle. What's the thinking there?
The nuclear weapons are there, of course, but if you look at, say, the Ukraine war, they seem to function mostly as a deterrent. Any loud nuclear saber rattling from Pakistan would probably face huge international backlash. They know how catastrophic even hinting at using tactical nukes could be.
So the nuclear shadow is always present, but actual use is still seen as, thankfully, a low probability. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. There's been some interesting thinking, particularly from military veterans, about longer-term strategic responses that aren't purely military. What's being talked about there?
Yeah, that's a really important dimension. These analyses stress strengthening India's position within Kashmir. Things like actively promoting normalcy, getting tourism back up and running, pushing for economic growth. The idea is to directly counter the terrorists' aim of creating chaos and instability. Getting tourists back is seen as quite key.
The message being, life goes on, you haven't won by creating fear.
Exactly. And it also means really doubling down on integrating Kashmir, making sure ordinary Kashmiris don't feel blamed or pushed away because of what extremists do. It's important to highlight, stories of local Kashmiris showing bravery or Indian Muslims condemning the violence. Build that national unity.
Foster that shared sense of purpose. What about tackling the roots of the problem?
Well, this strategic thinking also advises against sort of domestic blame games right after an attack. Unity against terror is the priority. Learning lessons, ensuring accountability that comes later. Right now, stand together.
And looking even longer term, how can India change the game strategically?
One really interesting idea is focusing on making Kashmir economically powerful, globally connected. Maybe attract international investment data centers, for instance, using the climate and educated workforce. Create assets there that the world has a stake in protecting.
Turn Kashmir into an economic powerhouse with global ties as a security strategy. That's a different way of looking at it.
And another part of this long-term view is undermining the Pakistani military establishment itself, exposing their wealth, the gap between their lifestyles and the sacrifices they demand, trying to erode their support base within Pakistan.
Sort of challenge their legitimacy from the inside out. And the ultimate aim isn't necessarily to wipe out the adversary, but
to wipe out the enmity. It's about strategically making hostility less attractive, less sustainable for them in the long run. It also involves contrasting India's approach, treating Kashmir as integral, with Pakistan's approach in the territories they control, showing the difference in development.
Okay, so it's a really complex picture. A mix of immediate reactions and this very long-term strategic thinking. Blending external pressure with internal strengthening, it's clear India's decision-making after Pahalgam is incredibly complicated.
Absolutely. They have to balance the understandable public desire for a strong response with the very real risks of things spiraling out of control and keep sight of those bigger long-term goals for the region.
So we've touched on immediate security, the diplomatic chess game, the range of military options, overt, covert, and these crucial long-view strategies about strengthening India from within and strategically discouraging hostile actors.
And it's just so important to remember there isn't one single right answer here. People will have different views on what's best. There's that public call for action, for retribution, but effective policy has to be calculated, multi-layered, thinking about both today and tomorrow.
Yeah, understanding India's potential response really means looking beyond just the headlines, beyond the immediate anger. You have to consider the geopolitics, the long game, the very real human costs on all sides. It's incredibly complex. So maybe the final thought for you, listening, is this. Considering everything we've discussed, the immediate needs, the risks, the long-term strategies, what kind of response do you think strikes the right balance? What would be most effective, not just now, but for building a more stable future?